Okay. Welcome again to part two, if you will, of the Groovy podcast, season 5, episode 2. Or overall, I guess the number must be like 82 or something like that. My name is Ken Kousen. I'm podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut. And I am this time joined by...
Hi, I'm Sergio del Amo, podcasting from Guadalajara, Spain.
So did you say Guadalajara?
Yes, Guadalajara.
Yeah, we'll have to update the show notes because I put Spain, but I didn't know where inside it.
It's close to Madrid area. I will submit a PR.
If you want. I mean, I can edit that easily enough, but I'm glad you were able to join us. We are approximately, you said you're GMT +1, is that right?
Yeah, we are in the London time zone. Sorry, not in the London time zone. We are in the Germany and all Europe time zone, but we should be in the London time zone, but because of, I don't know what's the intra story, but essentially we are, if you think Spain is always in the German time zone.
Yeah, time zones are weird anyway. I mean, we're on daylight savings right now, which I don't think the EU does anymore, right?
No, we do. We change like around my birthday always, like once. Around the end of October, we changed 1 hour, and I forgot when we changed. No.
Well, we are GMT -4 at the moment, so that puts us 5 hours. So it's you're 5 hours later than I am right now, apparently.
Yeah, it's 5 p.m. here. So typically I work with people in San Luis, and they jump between 6 and 7 hours normally, I think it is.
Yeah, so I mean, I know Central European time is GMT +2. I see that a lot, but you're one from that. At any rate, nobody cares. Let's talk a bit more about what we're actually supposed to be talking about, which is the groovy stuff for episode 82 for our season 5 episode 2 here. So first of all, by the way, how are you doing? I haven't heard from you for a while. How are things at OCI?
Yeah, doing fine. Things are fine at OCI. So far, been everything okay regarding COVID in a personal level.
What's your current position there now?
I am a principal software engineer there. And so I work on so the title is principal software engineer, and I work on the Micronaut department, I like to call it, team. Mostly on Micronaut. But yeah.
I mean, you know how job titles could be anything, anywhere.
Absolutely, yeah, especially in our sector.
Now, you recently, as I saw on Twitter, didn't you just teach a course related to Micronaut?
Yeah.
What was that like?
An AWS a Micronaut training. It was 2 weeks ago. 12 hours actually, 3 hours. So 4 days, 3 hours each day. It was fine. Actually, I think we should probably split it into 2 courses in the future because we have a lot of ground there to cover. Yeah, it was nice. It was. We have been doing this like every couple of months. We did a security one also in the beginning of the year. I am normally involved in those as well, like in training and webinars. Yeah, I like to do those.
Well, I've attended at least one of your webinars. I haven't been in one of the training classes, but I've been in 1 or 2 of your webinars. Now, I know we're going to have to mention this, of course. You have a training class, 3-day training class coming up, not you personally, but OCI does, with the data science with Apache Groovy with
Paul,
the inimitable Paul King.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, that's going to be incredible. That's I have it on the show notes. Was it June 28th to 30th, and it's like 4 hours a day each day. I haven't looked to see what time zone that is. I mean, he's in Australia, so I can't even imagine how you're going to handle that.
The other day we had an internal team meeting, and he submitted a recorded video with one of his talks. Yeah, he's in, especially for me, he's like in exactly the opposite of the world.
Right.
So yeah, sometimes he like connects in the middle of his night. But yeah, he is like working a lot in Groovy and doing some great things for Groovy 4. Yeah.
Well, we had one of those, the Great Conf people occasionally have one of those Friday meetings, you know, where they just get people together. And I was actually able to attend one, I think it was back in May, perhaps, or April. It was a little while ago. And Paul showed up, which was like bizarre, given that it was, you know, 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. wherever he was, you know, and he seemed fine and everything. So, I mean, honestly, if I could take that class, I would do it. I unfortunately have conflicts. But I mean, if you get a chance to listen to Paul King talk about anything, obviously you want to go. So
he's also a really good teacher as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Really, for someone who knows so much, he's really able to teach things really simple. So yeah,
now
if you are able to take the opportunity to attend, it's a great opportunity.
Right.
And I am wearing also my GR Conf t-shirt.
Oh yes, I see that with the
Groovissimo.
Groovissimo, yes, the masked Avenger there.
Which was supposed to have been like 10 days ago. Normally, I think it was always end of May, 1st of June, or something like that.
Well, hopefully next year. I mean, this year, the US is gradually emerging from the pandemic, and our biggest problem right now are the people who are, for stupid reasons, not getting the vaccine, you know. But of course, Europe and having much more trouble with distribution, and of course Asia, especially India, is being racked by it right now. So all of our sympathies go out to whoever is suffering under those circumstances. How are things in Spain, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, keep healthy, everyone, and if you are having a hard time, stay strong. In Spain, we are like getting vaccinated people over 50 right now, I think. It depends from region to region. Hopefully I will get vaccinated before the end of the summer. That's my hope. On a personal level, I'm doing fine. So been not going out much in the past 1 year and a half. So pretty much, I mean, pretty quiet with the kids and my wife. But yeah, everyone fine in my family. My parents got vaccinated recently, and also my in-laws as well. My wife is a health worker, so she got vaccinated like early this year.
Good.
Yeah, I have been lucky enough that everyone is fine. Here in Spain, we have a big death toll, and the country is going to take some time to recover, but it seems like we are seeing the end of the tunnel now. Let's see how it goes. We got out of lockdown last month, and things are, I think now with the summer and everything, like people are like, we are all quite tired of the situation.
Well, science works, you know. I mean, it worked. You know, it's kind of a miracle that we got these vaccines so quickly. For me, it was one of those few times in my life where being old actually was an advantage, you know. So I was able to get the vaccine relatively early. Ours came in March, you know, for my time frame, my age group and everything. And I'm still bugging my son to go get a second shot. So, you know, it's that kind of silliness. But yeah, I mean, more to the point, you know, back in keeping with what we're talking about, hopefully Great Conf will be back better than ever in 2022, presumably. I haven't heard anything, but I'm sure that
Soren wrote me the other day in the chat, and I think he will do it. I think he will run the conference next year, and I think that's great news. I will try to attend. And I recommend everyone to attend because Copenhagen is
the question in my mind is does Greach have any chance, or is it way too early to know?
I don't know. So my plan right now is to be honest, I don't know if there will be a Greach next year. Still undecided, but have to see how a couple of things play out, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the only answer that anybody can give at this point, right? I mean, there's still so much uncertainty as well. Yes. Now, speaking of conferences, by the way, I did notice that you tweeted that you're going to be speaking at ApacheCon at home in October.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's a virtual conference. They are like also like a free tier. So if anyone wants to attend, please don't hesitate. I think Paul will be speaking as well. I think he's the chairman of the
I'm actually
the Groovy track.
I'm actually going to be speaking as well. So I'd say I'd see you there, but of course it's online. So.
Yeah, we'll see you virtually.
What's your topic, by the way?
So I'm going to be talking about building a static website with Groovy and Gradle, which is something that I have been doing lately. So I built my personal website with Groovy and Gradle, and Micro's website actually and the Grace website, they have been built with Groovy for a long time. Now Micro's website is built on WordPress, but we built a lot of so for example, the guides website is built with Groovy and Gradle, and we do like I am pretty proud of the work we have done there. We have like so we have like automated the way we generate like these tutorials, so that we are able to upgrade them in the next version of Micron without changing the code. And we leverage the infrastructure that we have basically to create new Micron projects, to basically update the tutorials. We have been using a lot of Groovy to do that. For example, today or yesterday, we were like, so we had like quite slow build times because we were like running the test of all these sample applications. And we generate sample applications for Gradle, we generate sample applications for Maven. We had like an hour build time. So we did yesterday, we changed yesterday in, so Groovy really shines because you can like execute like a command and capture the process. So we did like a small snippet. We will basically execute like git diff to get like the difference of the files that you change from commit to commit. So if now, so you can do like you can have like a string and call dot execute in Groovy,
right?
And you can basically say like wait for or kill and give like a timeout, and essentially this basically allows you to like execute things outside of the JVM, right? So this has allowed us basically to know like okay, in this PR we are only changing this tutorial. So we basically ran all the tests for that particular tutorial. And that was important for us because essentially it was really frustrating. Like if you like wanted to fix like a typo or something like that, you had to wait like for an hour to get that.
Are you using a framework or anything, or is everything hand rolled?
We are basically using Gradle and Groovy, a lot of Groovy classes inside build source folder. So we are essentially like custom Gradle task.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I am still quite in love with Gradle, and I think Gradle is awesome. So yeah, well, back to your original question, I will be talking about static website generation with Groovy. And yeah, it will be in the context of my experience, which yeah, I think it has a lot of value, static websites, because they never go down. So
well, I definitely want to hear about it because my website is hopelessly out of date. I really need to replace it with something new, and I'd love to hear what you use there and see if I could take advantage of it. Yeah, I'm going to be talking more about. I've got a talk I've done before on functional programming in both Java and Groovy and Kotlin and comparing them. And there's the over-under for whoever was betting on the first mention of Kotlin in the podcast. There it is, I guess. But at any rate, that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'm sure Paul will be involved. I haven't seen a list of talks or anything yet, but I knew Paul was the head of the Groovy part of that. So I'm sure that, again, for those who are interested, that's September 21st to 23rd of this year. It is remote. It is all virtual. So there's a link in the show notes that'll take you to the website. You can register and go from there.
Yeah.
Are you doing anything else conference related, or is that about it?
I've been quite, I've been basically like not speaking a lot this year. Part because I'm being lazy or doing other things, but part I am a bit down on the online conference thing. I don't know. I don't. It's like a mixed feeling. So I see a lot of potential in distribution of content online and in video, but I see more like potential in on-demand and things like what you are doing in O'Reilly with the on-demand training courses. But the conference is like, I am myself not like attending any conference, virtual conference, like for the whole, like, I don't know, I am not taking like 2 days of vacation and going in my couch and attending the whole tracks as I would normally do when I go in a conference, right? And I think it's pretty much the same for everyone. And for the speaker, it's a bit difficult because you get less out of the conference, right? Because you are, don't do like all this networking that you normally do in conference when you speak. And also like, I don't know, sometimes it feels like you talk to the vacuum there. But yeah, mostly just trying to survive this COVID situation. So I'm doing like less outside of, less conferences. I have my plate full with other things. So.
Oh, I understand. I mean, it is pluses and minuses. It's nice not to have to travel. It's you lose a lot of the interaction. You lose a lot of the interaction even with the attendees. That's the downside. But at any rate, hopefully that'll be that'll all change next year. We'll see how things go this year where things are transitioning, but we'll see. Since we got you here, let's talk about things that are more directly related to what you do. I mean, you want to talk about the recent Micronaut releases, both the general availability and the milestone on 3 and what's coming with Micronaut. And you also work with Grails too, right?
Yeah, I do work less in the Grails open source project. So I have been supporting some clients with Grails in the past year, like working in their projects, but in like contributing to the open source part of Grails, I have been doing less. The heavyweight there is Punit Bell, so he has been doing an awesome job there. And also like David Estes got really involved and has been a wonderful job there as well. And
I'm sorry, who did you say?
David Estes, I believe, is the creator of the asset pipeline, right? Or I'm just mispronouncing his name.
I don't think I know that person.
No?
Wait, who did you say again? Did I miss
David
it again?
Estes.
Oh, David Estes. Yeah, I know the name. I haven't met him specifically, or if I have, I'm probably forgetting, and that could be very much as well. So he's also involved in the foundation as well.
I think he is. Yeah, I think he's also like so they are running like so now it's like Grails is being maintained by many people, not just people from OCI, and it's wonderful to see the community picking the baton there, and they are doing great work, and other companies are getting involved as well with the foundation. I don't think that's official yet, but I think that's great. That there are, as you know, there are many companies who have Grails applications in production. So it's good to see that they're involved in keeping the framework going forward.
Well, how about the Micronaut stuff that you actually work on directly?
Yeah, in Micronaut I am. So we are working now heavily on Micronaut 3. And the Micronaut team is growing, actually. We have some people here at OCI and some people in Oracle. So we have, of course, Graham in Oracle, but also Bart, who is really famous in the Groovy community. So Bart Beckwith, the creator of the Grace Spring Security Core plugin and all these families of plugins, he's working in Micronaut as well, in Oracle. And yeah, there are like a handful of programmers also in full-time in working in Micronaut in Oracle. So it's we do like a joint call with them like every Tuesday and Thursday. So we are coordinating both companies in the framework. Forward in terms of what's coming in Micron 3, many things. For me, things that end users will use a lot is probably like improvements in generics injection. And let me give you, for example, an example that I did in a client project is like we had some functionality to import files into an application. And this particular client has like he needed to import like CSV files and he needed to import like Excel files and XML files. We had some common logic, but we have some parsers, which depended on the input file. And we had like I don't know, like a parser who a bin which defines how to read like a line in Excel and a line in a row in CSV and like an XML element. And now in Micro 3, you can like have like a generic and basically inject, depending on the bin, the CSV implementation of that or the Excel implementation of that. So if you are like, if you are basically have like such a use case of generic and injection points and you are like suffering a little bit and using like name qualifiers to work around that, now you should be able to use like to leverage basically Java generics to inject the generic that you're looking for. And we are like replacing the default reactive library that Micro 2 was using is RxJava2. We're gonna replace that by Project Reactor.
Oh, you really are? Okay.
Yep. And I was actually today like doing like a bunch of flowable replacement with Flags and things like that.
Right. I mean, for those who don't know, I mean, there's a specification for reactive streams. It's actually at reactive-streams.org. And that specification is adhered to by a variety of libraries, both in the Java space and in the JavaScript space. I mean, RxJS adheres to that. And in the Java space, while a lot of people were using RxJava, and still are actually, the Spring people, interestingly enough, were heavily involved in Project Reactor. And that's the one they use under the hood. And even though there are adapters that connect Project Reactor to these other libraries that still adhere to the spec, it's kind of nice to see that Micronaut is now using the Project Reactor library under the hood. I mean, these interfaces, publisher, subscriber, subscription, they're even in Java now. They're in Java 9. But nobody would want to implement those interfaces yourself. You'd want to use a real library, and Project Reactor is certainly one of the leading ones. Was there a reason why they decided to switch to that one?
So I think the main reason is because Project Reactor, I believe, is going to give us like an easier to work around instrumentation. Okay. So we have some specific features that we had like to have like some custom code to deal with instrumentation in RxJava2, which hopefully the life will be easier using Project Reactor. Just to be clear, people are still gonna be able to use RxJava. So right now we support also Project Reactor. So we have like a dependency that you can add into your project and already use the Micronaut 2 Project Reactor and also RxJava 3 as well. Right. So we support all three reactive implementations. But internally, we are going to switch to that, and you will see like a lot of our documentation will change to default to use like in examples where we were like, I don't know, like a controller returning a single, you will see like a controller returning a mono now. But that's a big user-facing change that's coming in Micron 3. We are also like going to be using the Jakarta notations as well. In theory, I think users, so right now to define like an injection, you use like Java X inject, dot inject. Right. You will be using the Jakarta notation instead.
That's the CDI spec or whatever, that
Yeah.
context dependency injection. Yeah. Add inject, they call it, or whatever.
Yeah. So it's that's more like, I don't think it's going to change anything for users. It's just a matter of, but that's coming. And of course, one of the things that we have been, so Micron 3 will still support Java 8. So that's like, we are going to commit another major version to support Java 8. So if you are like using Java 8, Micron will have you covered there.
Okay.
So that means for me that I will be living with Java 8 as my default JDK for another year.
Well, that does bring up an interesting point. I mean, it's not just related to Micronaut, just related to the whole Groovy community. The current long-term support version of Java, according to Oracle, is 11, and this seems to be the year when much of the industry is transitioning from 8 to 11. I mean, I think the Oracle people expected it to happen last year, and then the pandemic hit and all the plans got thrown into chaos. But of course, the real issue is that in September, the version 17 comes out, and that's a new long-term support version. I mean, as far as Oracle's concerned, they'll want everybody to move to 17. And at 17 doesn't look like it's going to have anything that dramatic in it that's going to change people's lives, but it might, because they're finally going to get rid of that illegal access flag, equaling warn, which Gradle has kind of lived on for a while and Groovy's lived on and everything. And now that's going to become an error, or supposedly. I haven't seen the details. Now, the one ramification of that may be that people won't upgrade, if they don't like a particular version, they're not going to upgrade. But I will be interested in seeing what happens in the community as Java 11 becomes more dominant, and then ultimately, Java 17 becomes the long-term support version. But you're saying you're going to be locked into 8 for a while now, huh?
So yeah, basically the way I have configured my ID is like I build with JDK 11, but I have like this, I use IntelliJ IDEA for development, and you can have like code with Java 8 idioms, so that they warn you if you are like trying to use, I don't know, is optional, is empty. So like you can like code with JDK 11, but basically you are like telling IntelliJ like I want my code to be still Java 8 compatible. And they will warn you if you try like to use something that is not JDK. So the way I see it is more pragmatic. So I think if this is, if you go to cloud vendors now, to AWS or things like that, they all have like JDK 11 runtimes.
Right.
So if you have like a new project, and for my pet projects, I code in JDK 11. Once a new stable release of Java it comes this autumn, I think the cloud vendors will take a couple of months to adopt it. And as soon as you are able to deploy like to AWS, to Azure,
right,
like, or to GCP, like your fat jars with Java 17 JDK, then I think that will be like, I think that's, to be honest, is like, it's not just to run the latest stable version of Java in your laptop, right? You have to deploy it somewhere. So once the cloud vendors starts to adopt it, that's when people are start to move. So I see like many people are like, so I don't see anyone like starting new projects now using JDK 8, right? So it's just people that are for whatever reason locked into using JDK 8.
Yeah, Brian Getz has spoken about this fairly recently, and he's like objects to the notion that like JDK 16 or 15 or any of those, that they're not legitimate Java distributions. Of course they are. It's just that for deployment purposes, many companies don't want to upgrade their deployment environments every 6 months. So we have to wait until as you say, like Amazon Corretto or well, Azure's got one now too. That Microsoft has their own Open JDK build. When they implement these later versions, then of course that will change things. So another thing, by the way, that ties into the Gradle stuff. I mean, you mentioned Gradle a lot. I've been working with Gradle 7 for a while now, and one of the nice things in Gradle 7 is that toolchain support, that you can actually specify in the Gradle build file which JDK version you want, and it will look on your machine in all the normal places to see if you already have that version. And if you don't, I think it even offers to download it for you. I mean, IntelliJ's had a capability like that for a while, but for Gradle, for a build tool to offer that, that I find pretty interesting myself.
I have not used it myself. I know the feature that so we have all the Micronaut builds. So our internal builds to basically build all the modules and releases. We use Gradle, and we are already using Gradle 702. So we are
which is the current one, by the way,
which is the latest stable.
Yeah.
And I don't use that. So what I have in my computer is I have SDK man, right. And I have like a bunch of, so I run in a Mac. So I have a bunch of, there's like a program called Text Expander, which is basically like to have like shortcuts, which get replaced. So I have like shortcuts to basically change in my terminal windows.
Right.
From JDK, JDK 11, I have one for GraalVM.
Yeah, I just set up some aliases in my D shell script to switch. And yeah, a shout out to SDK Man, of course. Everybody should be supporting SDK Man. We have a link on to the Open Collective support mechanism for both Friends of Apache Groovy, of course, but also SDK Man, which totally rules. But I'm sorry, go ahead. You were saying?
No, absolutely. SDK Man is one of these open source tools that everyone should support. I use daily, and the ability, for example, to use like the GraalVM JDK is so simple with SDK Man that
right.
That's really rocks.
Well, it's interesting how, you know, the changes in Java 8 were enormous. I mean, the addition of the functional features to Java changed the idioms of how people code Java. Now, those of us in the Groovy community were already familiar with lambdas effectively and things like method references and stuff. It wasn't until Groovy 3 came out that they supported the Java syntax for those things. But Groovy's had capabilities like that. They just didn't have streams directly the same way Java had it. But the changes from 8 to 11 were not really that dramatic. It's only in the last 2 or 3 versions of Java when they put in like the enhanced switch statement and text blocks for the multi-line strings and the beginnings of pattern matching and things like that, that now they're starting to really add some interesting things to Java. I think Java 17, I think, is scheduled to have a release version of sealed classes as well, which may be the first major feature of Java I've seen that doesn't actually have a corresponding feature in Groovy. I mean, Groovy still has many things Java doesn't have, like traits and stuff, but there are no sealed classes as far as I'm aware of in Groovy.
Sealed classes will work like data classes in Kotlin?
Well, no, the data class analogy is records. So that's what they have in Java. Records were actually released in 16. And the problem with records, in my opinion, again, this is all my opinion, is that because they changed how the constructors work, like there's no default constructor and there's no getter methods in the normal mechanism, and they're all final and immutable, the JSON parsers, the JavaScript object notation parsers, most of them don't work well with records. I mean, right now, I think it's Jackson 2 does understand them, and that means the Spring framework understands them. But JSON doesn't, Moshi doesn't, many of those others. So we'll see whether that changes. I'm also not sure whether immutable objects like that play nicely with Java Persistence API. I mean, Grails, of course, has Gorm in it, and Micronaut can use Gorm as well. But how nicely, I mean, those have always played nicely with Groovy Pogos. I'm not sure how well they play with records. You know, in Groovy, we don't necessarily need records, but the final nature of them makes them not necessarily suitable for JPA in general. So we'll see how that goes too. But I am waiting to see, you know, whether we get to use a lot of these new features and what impact they will have on the Groovy community as well.
Yeah. Well, there is like a lot of the industry seems to be like, we are now like all languages seems to be going to these immutable classes everywhere, right?
Well, it plays nicely with concurrency. You know, I mean, it's so much easier to reason about concurrency if your objects don't have any shared mutable state. And streams has as one of their big selling points that you can move to parallel streams, and then now you're talking about avoiding shared mutable state, and functional programming has as one of its recommendations, going with immutability wherever possible. But unfortunately, there's a history here, and there's a lot of things in Java that kind of need some mutability. And like these JSON parsers like JPA, for example, Kotlin data classes are not a natural blend with JPA either. You have to go through some contortions to make everything work nicely there. So we'll see how all that plays out eventually. Let's see, what else do we have that we wanted to make sure we cover just to keep things moving along? The Groovy stuff, Groovy is still on 3.0.8, but there was an alpha release of Groovy 4. I have no idea what the schedule's like for that. I imagine we'll find out more at ApacheCon on everything. But one of the changes in Gradle 7, as I recall, was they moved to Groovy 3. That's another thing I think that happened with Spock 2, which we wanted to talk about. The Spock 2 release, in addition to being based on JUnit 5, which is in my opinion, again, a huge improvement over JUnit 4. I mean, I really like JUnit 5. I still like Spock better, but at any rate, not only are they based on JUnit 5, they're also based on Groovy 3 as well, with all the additional features there. Have you played it all with Spock 2, by the way, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so Micronaut is tested with Groovy 3 and Spock. So I write like a Spock 2 code every day. We have been like using the Spock milestones since the beginning,
which has been a while, and I haven't noticed. From my experience, I haven't noticed a lot of user changes. You know what I mean? It really has just been a question of changing my dependencies to make sure I have the right things in the class path. But just writing Spock tests has been pretty much the same. Although apparently now, what is it that Unroll is already built in now for data tests?
I don't know about the changes in Unroll. I know they have made some improvements to parallelization, which I haven't tested yet. So the big feature, I think it is that you can, which should be a huge feature, is that you can parallelize tests directly in Spock.
Now you can do that with Gradle too. I mean, I've been using that with Gradle for a long time, but to do it in Spock, that'll be very nice.
Yeah. So I think that will work in combination with Gradle. But I have not used that myself either. What I have been seeing is that Groovy 3 is more like strict in terms of compilation, right?
More like what?
More strict. So
strict. Okay.
So that's something that I noticed, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So for example, I spend my days writing code in Java and testing Groovy. And I use less things such as the def keywords and things like that.
Yeah, right.
In my day-to-day. So I think it's nice. I think it's like Groovy going a little bit with the times and becoming a more strict language. Sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing. So just to get back to what you were saying, like about JUnit improvements, and just to prefer Spock. So we write these tutorials in Micronaut called Micronaut guides, and we write them in both 3 languages, Kotlin, Java, and Groovy. And we write the test for Kotlin in JUnit with Kotlin, and the Java test in JUnit with Java, and the Groovy test we write them in Spock.
Right.
And it is true that JUnit 5 is a huge improvement if you are coming from JUnit 4.
Oh, yeah.
But I still prefer Spock personally. Whenever I say, so for example, the other day I was writing like this, the equivalent of a parameterized test with Unroll and where in Spock. In JUnit 5, you have like this thing where you define like a provider with arguments. I think you have to like include the JUnit parameters dependencies, and it's pretty similar to the Spock thing, right?
Right.
But I don't know. I think it's a combination of not just the Spock, but also like the fact that when you are using Spock, you are using Groovy. So I think especially for tests, the things like in tests, sometimes it's nice to have less verbosity, right?
Right.
So I think it's the combination of both. But I live I live this dual life where I write the unit and Spock like daily, and I still prefer Spock. So.
Oh yeah, I mean the JUnit 5 parameterized tests are a huge improvement over what they had at JUnit 4. It's really nice to be able to specify like getting your test data from a method, and or you from an enum or anything like that. But they still don't rival the nice data table tests inside of Spock. And of course, the fact that you're writing in Java means it's inherently going to be more verbose than what you're going to get in Groovy. And of course, Groovy also, Spock, I should say, also has a mocking framework built right in, which, the Java people are still working with Mockito. And while that's fine, I mean, Spock already has one there, and that's got to be helpful, regardless of how you feel about mocking frameworks in general. So I'm really hoping that gets rapid adoption. I don't know the people who work with that right now that much, but maybe at some point we should have somebody in the Spock community talk on the podcast or something like that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Now, go ahead. You were going to say?
So I was going to say like another shameless plug of Micronaut, but what I am seeing with Micronaut is that I write less unit tests now that I used to write. So when I was working with Spring Boot or with Grails, I was writing much more unit tests than functional tests. With Micronaut, I do it the other way around. We write mostly like functional tests because starting the application context or the embedded server is really, really fast. And I see the necessity and the way I mock things is instead of like creating like a real mock with the Spock mock, what I do is I create like a static class in the test case, which basically replaces it basically creates another bin of that particular interface. And that's the way I am mocking nowadays with Micronaut mostly. So instead of using like a mock, what I do is I create like a real implementation of the interface. So yeah, I think that's...
You make your own dummies, which, I mean, it's fine if there's not too many methods and if you own the class, with the Spring people, of course, you have mock bean, which lets you replace something in the application context. I'm sure Micronaut rather has something analogous to that. But I mean, again, the assumption there is that you have control over that. The rapid startup time of Micronaut, which is, I think that's wonderful. That obviously makes functional testing much more easy to manage and much more useful, much more robust there as well.
Yeah, I think I have the feeling that we have been telling ourselves this lie that we have to write more unit tests than functional tests. And that was basically just because unit tests were fast. But
yes,
at the end of the day, there is of course value in the unit test, but the real value I think is in the functional tests.
Well, Martin Fowler recently wrote a blog post about this. I mean, he emerges every once in a while to throw out one of these deep blog posts, and it's about the distribution between unit tests and whatever you call integration tests and functional tests. And he made the point that what people call unit tests now is not what the original developers of unit tests meant. They didn't necessarily mean a class in isolation with everything else mocked. They meant a single unit of set of classes operated together, which we often lump now into integration testing ideas there. And, then there's this, is it a pyramid or is it more of an oval? The wars have been started over less, All I know is that if it's not at least tested, I don't know that I believe it. And certainly that's true about my own code. Now, obviously, functional testing is great as long as it can happen very quickly, and that if something goes wrong, it's easy enough to determine where and why. That's the nice advantage. The other advantage of unit tests is you know exactly where the problem is. But, again, a lot of people have their own style on this, and they can distribute it. And I just happen to like what Spock brings to the table on all of that. And you could use Spock for your integration tests as well, as you say, or functional tests, if you want to use that term.
No, absolutely. So we use Spock for everything. And I still sometimes use a stab and mock with Spock, right? It's not that I never use those, but
Oh, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, just interesting.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing is like, that's somehow is changing a little bit. Like now you can like write tests in a kind of a different style, which is good. I think is
yes. Now, by the way,
as long as you have tests.
Oh yeah, you got to have something, or how do you know? Now, another thing related to Spock that I have in the show notes we should mention. Trisha G has done a lot of work putting together a nice Spock tutorial for IntelliJ, and it's like a multi-part tutorial, and then there's a corresponding YouTube video where she basically does the whole thing live. So that both of those are linked, and if you're interested in any of that, that's fine. As long as we're talking about testing as well, there was a comment. I saw this. I haven't actually looked into it. Jeb, the good old Jeb project, which is used for functional testing, or what they call browser automation, for driving a browser. That apparently there was a tweet about Jeb support inside IntelliJ as being part of the Selenium page generation or whatever. And I'm like, really? Because you just don't hear that much out of Jeb these days, but hopefully that's still, that page model and everything is still very applicable and usable. Do you ever get to play with Jeb at all? Just out of curiosity.
I do, right? I use Jeb. I am kind of, let me see how I put this. So I don't sound too old. So I like backends which generate HTML on the server side still.
Oh, okay.
So I am, so there has been in the past like a couple of cool open source projects, such as there is one project called Turbo, which we can include a link in the show notes, which basically gives you like some capabilities to generate HTML on the server side and essentially only fetch the parts of the DOM that you want and replace.
Oh, okay.
So the idea is that this is a bit of a digression of the Jeb question, but
whatever.
Stop me at whatever point.
Now take it however you like.
So the JavaScript is good, and I'm not saying JavaScript is bad, but I think the pendulum has gone too much. It is way too much on the JavaScript side, and we are trying to do everything on the JavaScript side, which I necessarily don't think is necessarily the best approach for many companies. I think for many companies, having like dummy backends were just basically split information from the database, and then have security constraints on the backend, security constraints on the front end.
Right.
Recreating some views because we have to create like some objects to be rendered as JSON on the backend. Then those objects are received on the front end. They have to be inflated, and then they have to build basically HTML parts of the page. I don't think that's the best option for many companies, which I'm probably on the minority of this opinion. I think this is great for many big companies, but you have like huge developer teams, and they can have like a big development team on the front end and a big development team on the back end. But I don't think that's necessarily the case for many small companies. Basically, my point is regarding Jeb is I still use Jeb a lot because I like to generate like HTML on the server side a lot. And when you have it directly there, integrated on your test, that you generate the test and you can test it, and I think that works wonders. I see that Marcin has a milestone of Jeb 5.
Good.
To be honest, I don't know what's coming on Jeb 5.
No, I don't either.
But I use it not every day, but I use it in all my pet projects where I have like server-side HTML. And we have used it for clients. I have used it with Micron as well. If anyone is generating server-side HTML or needs like so if you are like a Java developer and you want to work with Selenium, I will say check up Jeb because you will be really happy.
Right. I mean, Jeb is a wonderful DSL and page model on top of Selenium, or I guess WebDriver is the later thing there. But you're right, it's for browser automation. And of course, the industry went away from a lot of browser automation when they adopted RESTful web services everywhere. I tend to think of that as associated with like the rise of mobile devices. Because on a mobile device, you really want an app. You don't really want to use your mobile browser for everything. And even though some people do, apps, of course, have their own UI. You know, the UI in an Android app, the UI on an iOS app, that's not asking for page generation on the back end. That's just asking for JSON data that they'll render or parse or whatever. So it's a combination of the rise of the JavaScript MVC frameworks like Vue and React and things like that, along with the rise of mobile. And you know, and it also, REST tends to fit nicely with the cloud computing environments, especially when you get stateless services on the back end. I mean, I can see where it all went, but you're right. If you're still generating browser views, then JavaScript is not necessarily the way to go. You don't just set up a node server in the back end. Sooner or later, you have to do a transaction, you know?
So I think there is some part of the people who are like creating like front ends with JavaScript, and when they are writing like functional tests, I think they are using things like Cypress. So there are like tools to write the same test that we will write in Jeff, right? They will write them with Cypress, which I believe is JavaScript, right? So I understand the appeal, right? You are like a front end developer who is comfortable with JavaScript, and you want to write the front-end test with the same technology. So I think in the past, the people on the back end, such as myself, we were like creating more front ends as well. And we were comfortable writing functional tests using Selenium, right? And using things such as JEP, or at the end of the day, Groovy or Java, right? So I think there is some part of, I think this Selenium part of the JVM ecosystem is, I don't know if they have less traction, but I think I think some of the testing is moving to the JavaScript world because the front-end code is being written there, right?
Well, the argument being that if, you know, you can in fact drive in a nail with a wrench, but is that the right tool to do it with? You know, that's the idea. But I get that. I mean, the other thing, of course, the other pendulum that swings back and forth is something I see in the Android world a lot, which is the move to a component-based architecture, you know, and Java's had experiments with that over the years. One of the more infamous ones being Java Server Faces, you know, where your whole front end was built in Java, really, even though it took some doing. And of course, the Android people now moving to Jetpack Compose and all these components, they're trying to do something similar and trying to get all the same advantages out of it. And we'll see, you know, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, I don't know. But it's something to keep an eye on. Before we go, just want to see if there's a couple last things we want to talk about. I don't want this to go too long, that's all. For example, I noticed one of the particularly silly things that apparently we missed since the last podcast was that Grail's mascot now has a name, apparently, right?
Oh, yeah, finally,
yeah. Were you involved in any of that? I mean, that was a contest or something.
There was a contest. I was not particularly involved, but yeah, I was aware of the contest.
So do you remember the name here? I mean, I've got the page brought up and everything.
You don't put me on the spot.
No. Yeah, it looks like a knight, and it's now Sir Gideon of Grail.
Yes,
apparently.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. With a page that says "Hello World" and everything. It doesn't. It's got a list of winners there. Boy, I'll probably mess up the names if I mention them. So I'll just say check out the link if you're interested. So that was done back in March, and okay. Good. Grail's that has a mascot, and the mascot now has a name. You know, that's good. That's why I was always happy with your newsletter having or actually our little octopus here, right? Having a name eventually. Remember that?
The newsletter. I remember the newsletter.
Remember the name you came up for that one, right?
It was Ursula, no?
Ursula, right? Yeah, the squid there, the octopus, or whatever the heck it was.
Yeah, it was. The newsletter is a bit on standby.
Yeah, well, I understand that. I have a newsletter that, you know, the Groovy Calamari newsletter, of course, for those who are not aware. I mean, I put out a newsletter every week, so I could give you a hard time about that. Have you noticed that I don't, by the way, that I don't give you a hard time when you don't put out podcasts or YouTube? I just mentioned this in passing. We'll just move on.
It is really nice to be on. So I thought you were changing the format of the Groovy podcast to be like a yearly podcast with only one episode per year. And I was surprised when you told me like to join you today, because
I asked for that. Yeah, I asked for that. Very good, very good. Speaking of Android, by the way, I couldn't believe somebody did this, so I had to add it to the show notes. Did you see somebody made an Android Groovy shell? You actually can open up Groovy SH on an Android device.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Little mechanism. I have not tried it. I linked to the user manual. I'm scared, but I'm going to have to try that, because just the idea of doing a Groovy shell on an Android device is just too funny, not to include in there. There was one other thing I want to mention. We got a pull request on the show notes from last month or last episode, which I missed, unfortunately. So I added it to this one. It's let me refresh here. The author is Marcin. Okay, let me try this. Zayakowski, I think it is, Zayachowski. I'm probably getting it wrong. At any rate, he created what he called a Gradle Nexus publish plugin. And this was done as a way to release to Maven Central, especially as, JCenter was going away. Now, since that came out, the people at JFrog have announced that JCenter is going to be around indefinitely. It's just not accepting anything new. So they will still be a place you can have in your downloads. But I've noticed that in IntelliJ, when you open a Gradle build file, JCenter as a method, inside the repositories is now deprecated. It actually has a line through it saying, don't do this. And that happens on Android apps as well, saying, don't use that, use Maven Central from now on. So we'll see.
Yeah, Punit wrote a blog post as well showing how to publish the Grails plugin to Maven Central.
Oh, I do remember that, right.
And I have been doing myself some publishing to Maven Central as well. So the people in the Grails project have done a great job to basically have the fewest impact to Grails as possible of the JCenter changes. We had one issue this week with the repo.grails, which is an artifactory that JFrog hosts for the Grails framework. The URL changed, and so there is a GitHub issue. So if you have issues resolving that repository, check out the Grails. So in GitHub, github.com/Grails core.
If you want to
check out the issues, I will add a link in the blog post.
Cool. Okay.
But yeah, the JCenter changes were a surprise and a lot of work for open source.
I mean, we can give Baruch a little bit of a hard time for not being here, but I don't know if I want to blame him for everything going on with that.
I don't want to blame him for anything, because
well, don't worry. The odds of him actually listening to this podcast are very small. So, he's never going to know. So, maybe we'll bring it up on the next one or something like that. I think that's everything that I listed. We'll add that extra blog post from Punit, of course, in there when you get as soon as we get a chance. Is there anything else? I guess I should mention, I keep forgetting to do this. I actually have a new book coming out. My book is not a technical book, which is part of the reason I keep forgetting to mention it. I have been giving presentations for years called Managing Your Manager. And when I started to turn that into book form for pragmatic programmers for the Pragmatic Bookshelf, they did their search engine optimization and their Amazon discoverability stuff, all that black magic, and said, no, you can't use that name. And now the name of the book is called Help Your Boss Help You, which is nowhere near as good. I can actually watch people talk themselves into it over time and think, well, I guess that's all right. But that's the name of the book. It went to the publication process, Monday of this week. So expect the text is complete. You can get it as a beta. The ebook will be released probably next month, I'm guessing, and then the print to follow, however long it takes print to follow, you know. And you're welcome to have that in there. I could not, I mean, as much as I felt obligated to mention it, I just couldn't bring myself to put a link on the show notes for it. So I don't know, but it's called Help Your Boss Help You. It's at Pragmatic Programmers. That's what I've been spending. That's my pandemic book, if you will. That's what I've been spending a lot of my pandemic time on. Is there anything you want to mention?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I saw the video. So you used to have content related to manage your boss as video content in O'Reilly. I watched that and it was great. So I think the book will be good for sure.
I was really holding my breath when you said that. I had no idea which way you were going to go on.
No, that was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. So I am, yeah, absolutely. You should include a link in the show notes.
Oh, well, maybe I will then. Is there anything you want to mention? Anything coming up for you or now? OCI is still hiring, right? Is it? Do you want to mention that, or is there anything else?
Yeah, we are. So if you are, we are more or less always hiring. So if you are interested in Grace or Micronaut, reach out and I can get you connected. If you speak Spanish, I am doing like a bi-weekly podcast in Spanish, which actually we have been releasing during all this year, once every 2 weeks, every Friday. But it's in Spanish. And I am blogging more on my website, so sergiodelamo.com. I am blogging more and I am writing a lot of micro tutorials. And that's pretty much everything I can plug.
Well, we'll have to put a link in there somewhere, because the only link I added at the bottom for you was object computing. But if you want to put in your actual homepage, that'd probably be very helpful. You know, just add that at the bottom as well. I think that's everything. I'm trying to remember. Oh, we should thank No Fluff Just Stuff, the conference tour, for hosting the homepage for the Groovy podcast. Everything should eventually be there. If it's not, I'll have to bug the people there to update it. Otherwise, my plan will be to convert all this and upload it as a podcast and also the audio form today. So, you know, if you have any other suggestions or comments, or anybody who's listening has suggestions or comments or things they want to add, please feel free to contact us at the Twitter feed, the @Groovy Podcast Twitter feed, or at either of us directly, or harass Baruch, because I mean, there's no downside there. You know, feel free to give him a hard time about whatever. You know, that sounds fine. So again, I want to thank you very much for taking the time, you know, to be on the podcast. And you know, it's always better to have someone, you know, harassing you from inside than from outside, right? You know.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure. Looking forward to the next episode in 2022.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the Groovy Calamari at some point too.
At some point in the future.
No, we'll see what we can do. Okay, well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you, Ken.
Take care.